And so we put up, we have these posters here, and then we have the roads at the time in 1798, and the schools and taverns and stuff like that.
About a year ago.
So much history.
Oh, yeah, that's a lot of
The
people don't
proclamation I
know.
have at home because they sent it over from the township. They put a big rubber band around and they bent
That
it.
house
So-
up there.
408-1. So I have to like iron it.
I
The,
pass it all the time.
the Santa Wasso's bar?
It's
Is that
up
what you're
at White
pointing at?
House.
Oh,
The
you're
house
talking about
up
the one
top?
in Monroe.
Yeah,
Yeah, across from the Sunoco station on Cranberry Road.
yeah, it's right at Cranberry Road.
Yeah,
Right on the
I
corner.
have a friend that lives in that development. I pass that all the time
mm-hmm.
and it's still there and nobody lives there.
Yeah, I don't know what the,
And they keep it up, they cut the grass.
I don't know.
Now, you know anything about it?
Is
it's in Monroe Township,
Oh,
not
it's
South.
around-
Oh, you're talking about the big White House,
Yeah.
the wedding cake
Oh,
type?
before you make the
type
left
house?
onto Cranberry Road?
Yes, when you go to
Okay.
Cranberry Road, it's right on the corner.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So I thought the right side was Monroe, but the left side was still South Brunswick.
Yeah, it's in South Brunswick, to where the
That's where
Sunoco
the-
station is.
Mhm.
Yeah,
That's South
that's where the
Brunswick
border
Township.
is.
Across the street is Monroe.
I think the state or the county or somebody took it over.
Ain't the state.
And I
Guarantee
think,
that.
yeah, they're gonna turn it into something.
But
For
Holy
years
Cross
and years.
Cemetery is South Brunswick, right?
No, that's on the other.
It
side of
is
the
on
road.
the other side, but I
I
thought it
think
was in
that's
South
still South
Brunswick.
Brunswick, because I think as you go
Oh,
down,
so it's a weird pie
like at
shape.
522, eventually it turns,
Hmm.
there's like a weird cutoff there.
Yeah, you're right on the border there, so, like with borders, they shifted here and there.
Right.
Like with Franklin Park and South Brunswick,
Mhm.
there were times when Route 27 cut into, what we know as Somerset County. And there were times when it cut into, South Brunswick. And that was the border.
Mhm.
So at one time you considered part of South Brunswick. And at another, let's say 50 years after that, you could be considered part of Somerset County. Because the farmers used to shift the road, based on what they were growing and what they wanted to do in that area.
Especially on 27 too.
No,
Right,
that's
yeah.
what we're talking
Oh,
about.
you're talking about 27.
Yeah, and the lower road is what you're talking about. You're talking about the Cranberry South River Road? Is that White House and so forth, right?
Sometimes I see a light on if I'm coming when it's dark.
Yeah, those are
It goes on
squatters.
automatically.
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah, they're squatters.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
No, I'm just.
I was gonna say.
It's happened before.
Yeah, right. But that's called the lower road. See, Route 27 is the upper road. South Brunswick is bordered by those two roads. The lower road at one time was actually more popular than the upper road. But then they lost out when the stagecoaches started to advertise that they could get you from Philadelphia to New York in 2.5 days.
Imagine
And the
that.
lower road couldn't compete with that.
Well,
Then
they have
Route 27
traffic
became the road
Probably not.
until Route 1 came along.
Lots of Brooklyn wagon wheels.
But this is all off the subject, Brandon.
How much for the
Well,
trolls?
it's all related. It's all related. You want to start soon or what? It's good time.
Oh, it's a good time to start.
Yeah.
We have 7 people online.
On time is a good time.
Okay. All right. So I assume everybody out there can hear me. With this one, we're going to start off with the presentation for Women's History Month. This one we're starting way back in history. We have like the prehistory here, because the reason is that the Lenape Indians were matrilineal. So that's actually, it's relevant to what we're talking about tonight. And that'll be starting that. So as soon as you're ready, Ed, I'll switch to the first slide.
Okay, I'm ready. Randy, I'll give you one of these.
Okay, thanks.
I thought for women in history, it might be interesting to start with the very first women who were in what we know as the South Brunswick area. Now, I have to go back way before you were born in order to do that. because we're talking about 20,000 years ago. And we're talking about the Native American women who were accompanied by their men who were hunters. So I'm reversing it. You know, you would usually say, if I were chauvinistic, the women were accompanying the men. But keep that in mind when we talk about the Lenni Lenape, okay, as to who was accompanying whom. Now, what's going on at this time, because this comes in waves. There are actually 4 waves of Native American women who came to this area. Try to imagine this. New Jersey, as you know it, what we sit on is the intercoastal plain and the Piedmont area. So when you take Route 1 and you take Sand Hill Road and Major Road and so forth, you know how you dip down a little bit? Okay, well, you're going from the Piedmont area, which is really pre-mountain area, down to the intercoastal plain. Back in this time, they had the outer coastal plain. And guess what was roaming along there? Mastodons, mammoths, very large game. So the Native Americans coming all the way, land bridge theory, coming down through Alaska and Canada and all that, that was 40,000 years ago. They theorized that when that began. So now 20,000 years, they've arrived in this area. And they're hunting and trying to get to, in a seasonal way, the outer coastal plain. So they're passing through here. So all the Native Americans that you would know about from the South Brunswick area, it's all transitory. They're just passing through. So we don't have any artifacts of permanent settlements of Native Americans in the South Brunswick area.
They found fire pits, didn't they? Haven't they found like
Well,
fire
that's
pits?
temporary.
Yeah,
See,
yeah.
in other words, that's your campsites, your seasonal campgrounds of settlement. You might have a settlement or two along the Millstone River, where Kingston is, and a little bit north of that. And you might have some settlements, you know, like we have Indian Fields, and they have found artifacts there. Therefore, that area is called Indian Fields. But these are basically temporary sites. The women would be there basically to set up the dwellings that they would be in. That was women's work. And they would basically take what was hunted and prepare it for clothing, food, whatever. And when they killed something like a mammoth or a mastodon, and at one time, if you can imagine this, there were mammoths and mastodons in the South Brunswick area. They would use everything that on that animal they would use, put to use. Okay, so the women's work back in those days was really rough, really rough. And the stuff that I researched, one of the toughest jobs was to soften the leather.
Like the tanning?
And how, not just tanning, because they had to use natural stuff for that, bark from trees and so forth. But to make the leather supple, the women had to chew the leather of the animals. Okay. Now, when before they chewed it, they had to take the animal skin, and if it had fur on it, if it had hair on it, they had to remove that if it were going to be used for light clothing. Okay, so even before they chewed it, they had to prepare it. That was a pretty gross task because they used urine to defoliate the hides, to take the hair out. Okay, then they went to the process of chewing the leather. Okay, and then drying it and softened and so forth like that. And then it could be sewn, and they used bones from the animals for their sewing. This was women's work. But the women had, the main things they had to do was build the shelters. Okay, that was with animal hides and bending the saplings of the trees to make the types of huts. Okay, so you go through 4 periods of time.
So I'm gonna start with the Paleolithic. Right?
Yeah,
There we go.
the Paleo Native Americans, this means the first. Okay, and this is a pretty good picture of the type of thing that you would have seen in the South Brunswick area, because these are nomadic hunters and no planting. They don't do any planting. But you see the women have gathered some things. You see some baskets there. And the basket weaving develops and gets better and better by the time you get up to the Lenni Lenape. Very small groups, not large groups at all. If you had a group in the South Brunswick area in this very early part, maybe it would number maximum of 20 people. And if you're talking about the balance between males and females, you'd probably say 10 and 10. Okay, so very small population. And the most of the hunting that was done in the South Brunswick area was small game. At this time, the swamplands that you know of as Pigeon Swamp and so on, they're not developed yet. Because remember, this is a time when your ice age is starting to recede. Okay, and the more the ice age recedes, the more the water level of the ocean and so forth increases. And so we lose our outer coastal plain. So that hunting is gone. So these hunters that came through first, the paleo, then they disappear. Okay? Then you have the archaic Native Americans. That's about 9,000 to 3,000 years ago. So they had about 6,000 years to do their business in the South Brunswick area. And then they wander away and they fade away. And then you have the woodland Native Americans. And that's not the Lenni Lenape yet. Okay? So you had 3 time periods where you had women from those time periods doing their various things that have to do with the hunting. Now, the farming comes in when you get to the woodland Indians. So that means now the women had to help with clearing areas, and that meant removing trees and getting the soil ready for planting. At first, a lot of that planting was sort of haphazard, accidental. Then it got better organized when they finally got to the 3 sisters. And I'll explain that in a minute. Okay, so then you get to the Lenni Lenape. And they were also into the seasonal thing, but their settlements, like along the Millstone River, were a little more established than the ones who came before. And some of the Lenni Lenape were here to stay. They did do some wandering around and so forth, but this became one of their hunting grounds. Hence you have Indian fields, hence you have Indian artifacts that can be found along the Millstone River. As they're doing this, the women's tools developed better and better as the men's tools did. The men's tools for hunting, that was the man's job. The women's tools for scraping the skins, for planting, for making the dwelling places again. Now you're into huts that look a little more established than that. Yeah, Randy, you can move along.
The next one is Higgins.
Okay. Okay, so we're gonna stare at these Native Americans for the whole time. Okay, now, that's okay. I got a few more things to say, and then I'm finished with that.
Okay.
I'll name the sites in the South Brunswick area, because most of them, or some of them have Indian, Native American names. The Mattawam site. Now, Mattawam was the old name for the Millstone River. Okay, so the Native Americans called that river the Mattawam. Okay, and what it means is the brook of stones. That's one thing. The Wampawag site. That's where you have, you know where the quarry is? Above Kingston, you know,
Okay.
off of Route 27
Oh,
on the Somerset side. Well, back up in there and up the Millstone River from Kingston, that is called the Wampawag site. And I don't know what that means. I don't have a translation for that. The Piscopec site is along Lawrence Brook. So now you're on the other side of South Brunswick. where you have Lawrence Brook. So you see where a water source is, you're gonna most likely have a Native American, either temporary settlement, permanent, something like that. Then you have Indian fields. I don't have a Native American name for that area. That's just the English naming it. And then we're 6 Mile Run. Now, 6 Mile Run crosses 27. You know that, but it goes all the way down to the Millstone, going through Somerset County. And the Native Americans had a fairly good sized settlement where the 6 Mile Run ran into the Millstone River. Okay, we don't lay claim to that because that's deep into Somerset County, but that's one that was in the area. And then they would hunt in the South Brunswick area. Okay, now there had two trails. Before the English and the Dutch came along and had names for Route 27, it was called the Assunpink Trail. And that's named after the Assunpink Creek, which is down in the Trenton area. So this was the path that the Native Americans took to get from the Raritan River down to the Delaware River. And it came through this area. That was turned into Route 27 eventually. Then there's the Cross-Wixon Trail, and this is where you have George's Road. Now, why would the Native Americans want a road going that way? In order to get to the Jersey Shore to pick up the shells to use for wampum. That would be women's work also. And they would bring those and trade. And so with tribes who didn't get to the Jersey Shore. So again, that's a transition type of thing. Okay. Now, we get to the Lenni Lenape, and I gave you a sheet here, and you can read it and keep it. It's on both sides, and it gives you a lot of the duties and so forth of the Native Americans. The great thing about the Lenni Lenapes and women is that the Lenni Lenapes were one of the few tribes that were matrilineal. And that means that they trace their ancestry through the woman, like the head woman of the tribe, rather than the man. Now, the Iroquois, who beat up on the Lenni Lenape and called the men women, because of that matrilineal thing and some other reasons, they were a subjugated tribe, and they had to pay tribute to the Iroquois. Okay? So some of the stuff that they hunted, the shells, whatever, they had to pay tribute to keep peace with the warlike Iroquois Indians at the time. Now, the main responsibility of the women of the tribe, and this is actually for each clan that makes up the tribe, when a Native American brave male picks out a mate, the Native American male does not take the woman and bring the woman to his clan or tribe. He has to go live with his mate's clan or tribe, matrilineal. Okay, so the male who's brought into it has a lower status than the males that were born to the women of that clan, and also the women. Now the women get together and they pick the chief for the local tribe. And there are many sub-tribes of the Lenni Lenape, all sorts of names that you can't pronounce. So I'm not going to get into that. But it's interesting that the woman is number one amongst the Lenni Lenape. The chief has to go to the woman to get permission to do stuff. And the only time the chief and his braves are superior is in time of war. And that's when they do the fighting. Okay? And then when peace comes again, then the women take charge again. That's as far as what I've read about it. And so I find it fascinating that the women in this area, going back a long time, had quite a bit of power. Lenny Lenape. Now then the English and the Dutch come along. And I'm looking at it from the perspective of who were the pioneer women that settled in the South Brunswick area. And I picked out my top 10. Okay. I will
Starting
now
with-
provide you with the top 10.
Starting with Higgins.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you're thirsting to know. Okay. Now here's Mrs. Higgins. That's Mary Newbold Higgins. This is a sketch that Randy did in his third grade history class.
Yeah, right.
The 3 pigs.
Yeah, right.
Now, why did we pick out this Mrs. Higgins feeding the pigs? Why did we do that? It was dead silence in the room.
Because that's all
It
Randy,
must be
that's all Randy
complicated.
could draw.
What's that?
That's all Randy could draw.
That's
Yeah,
all
right.
Randy could draw, yes. Well, he did a good job on the woman, I must say that. But now, do you know where the Higgins lived? If you go down 27 and you see that red house with the yellow trim, it's a, was it a yoga center now? or
Yeah,
Something
something
like
like
that.
Like
Yeah.
that.
You know, it's,
Like Cordova
before you get to
Farms?
the Amish thing?
I
Or is
like-
it-
Yeah.
Yeah, right where the fork in the road is. Okay,
Yeah, right
now,
across the cemetery.
at that time, that was when there was a shifting border. So we consider the Higgins part of South Brunswick because they're buried there. The family cemetery is on the South Brunswick side. This farm that they had, now they were considered in the beginning under English court of law squatters because they purchased their land from the Lenni Lenape Native Americans who didn't have the concept of land ownership. And they traded their land, which they thought was no big deal. They thought they got a great deal for pigs. What Jedediah Higgins did was give the Native Americans a sow and her litter of piglets, and he got 1,500 acres of land.
Wow.
Now, the Native Americans thought this was a good deal because their concept of land was, oh, okay, they can say they own the land, but we still can hunt on it and do anything we want on the land. Okay, now when the English and Dutch got nasty about it and they drove off the Native Americans, then things got nasty. They got even nastier when the proprietors who had purchased that land legally through the English courts fought with the farmers. Okay, and that was a big deal with some South Brunswick farmers because they had bought from the Native Americans, they had not bought from the proprietors. And so that was a big deal. Okay, so Mary Newbold Higgins is on the number 1 on the list. Why number 1? Because they had laid the claim of being here first. And we're talking about around the year 1700. They could have been here in 1698. They could have been here in 1703, but somewhere in there, we rounded off. 1700 was when your first European people came in and settled. Okay, now next is Gertrude Hageman.
Wait a minute. I think I have the one beforehand before that.
You have a glitch in our
Maybe.
advanced
Hagerman.
computer system.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, now Dallas Hageman, her husband, was one of the leaders of the farmers' riots against the proprietors. This was a little later on than the settlement time, but he was a hero. And so therefore his wife would lay claim to being the wife of the guy who got the farmers organized. And I'm sure she got the women organized too. But there's actually violence. When they say the farmers' riots, there were actual riots. Now, most of the nastiness took place in places like Elizabethtown. At that time, now it's called Elizabeth. New Brunswick had some trouble. We didn't really have a violence, shootings or anything like that. No deaths down in the South Brunswick area, but there were farmers who participated in it. Okay, now we're ready for number 3.
I got the one before that. What's her name?
This is Margaret Farrington Barkalow.
I don't know if I have one. I have the one.
Well, that's all right, we can use our.
Yeah.
Any idea where
Yeah.
Gertrude lived?
Where Gertrude lived, the Hagemans, yes, on Route 27.
Okay.
Yeah, your settlements in South Brunswick at this very early time, because I'm talking about from 1700 to 1720. So that narrow thing, that's when the pioneers came in. Along Route 27, mostly Dutch. And along George's Road, okay, going into Crossroads, and all the way down to Cranberry. Cranberry had a Scottish English settlement down there real early. They may even have predated Higgins on Route 27. But where the Indian trails were, that's where you had your first settlements. Okay, so Margaret Farrington Barkalow is married to Conrad Willems Barkalow, and Barkalow, I have that spelling now, and there are different spellings. There's Baraclow. There's a lot of different ways to spell it, but you're talking about a Dutch name, just as the Hagemans were Dutch. So now what you have here, you have the Higgins, and then you start with some of the Dutch names. Okay, so we're ready for the next one.
But this is the one we got up here, Ed.
Yeah, Gertie Jansen Gulick. Now, can you tell me what book that is?
Bible, Quran.
It's, what'd you say, Bible?
The Quran?
The Quran, right. Now, when the Gulicks came here to the South Brunswick area, the women who were already here, okay, on either side of Route 27, because they were associated with 9 Mile Run and Sand Hill and 10 Mile Run in that area. Gertie brought along a Quran book, okay, the Muslim Bible, and it was known that she had it, and so the rumor was that she was a Muslim, and she was an Arab, and they enhanced the story and said she's from North Africa, and she's not one of us, that type of thing. But you can imagine how this was in a stronghold of Protestant religion, with the Dutch reform of the Dutch and the Presbyterian thing along Route 27. And though those churches technically hadn't been built yet. But anyway, the people brought their religion with them. Well, as it turns out, Gertie's uncle had spent several years in Morocco, and he picked up a Quran, and that became a family heirloom. They couldn't read it. They didn't know what it said, but it seemed to be valuable. This is a great thing to bring along. So when they came from Long Island, where a lot of the Dutch came to settle in our area, they brought along the Quran. So this was her claim to fame, although it led to a lot of embarrassment and a lot of explanation. Okay, but that was Gertie.
Is that book actually hers? Or is that just a?
That's just a
That's a-
sample that.
That's a
Randy
stock
found.
picture I found,
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, I was kidding with Randy. I
That
said,
would be
this
good if
a
we had
great
that.
artifact for the
Wow.
history.
Amazing.
If we had
Yes.
Gertie's Quran, that would be so great.
Oh, my gosh.
But maybe it's buried somewhere along Route 27. We don't know. But it's probably lost and forgotten.
So do you know what religion she was?
She was a Dutch reform, yeah, like her husband. It's just that she had this, that her uncle was Dutch reform too, but he picked it up along the way, his adventures. It's just one of those things that happen. Okay,
So the next one is Mary Leonard.
okay, okay, I got you. Okay, this is Charity Whitehead Leonard. Charity Whitehead Leonard, married to James Leonard. Okay, they're associated with Kingston. And they eventually, the Leonard family owned a lot of different properties in Kingston. This is an idealized farm?
Well,
Picture.
actually, what this is a picture of the Backrack Farm. So this is the library spot from Kingston Lane. So if you look back in the 50s, this is what this area right here would look like.
The
I think it was
1950s.
yeah, 1950s.
Right.
Yeah, I just used it because it didn't really have anything that would show that it's
Because
1950s.
historically, I'm not even up to 1750 yet. But you see how cleared the land is? You have to keep in mind that most of South Brunswick, 1700, 1720, was forest. And if it wasn't forest, it was swamp. Okay? So a lot of clearing had to be done. And that clearing was done by slaves, by indentured servants, by paid laborers, and by the farmers and their children.
Not the Indians.
Not the Native Americans. The Native Americans were still around at this time, but not in the numbers that they were before. And they're dwindling fast. And one of the reasons is because of illnesses. They didn't have the immunity to battle the diseases that the Europeans brought in. So they were dying like flies. But this land here that you see, where you see it cleared, that was once forest. So you can imagine the labor that was involved in that type of thing. Okay, we're moving on.
Mary Hoagland.
Okay, now this is Mary Hoagland, and at work with some other women. She was married to Cornelius Dirks Hoagland, again a Dutch family. And this just gives you a sample of one of their duties, and of course that was preparing the food. The Native American women did that. The European women did that. Preparation of the food was women's work. And the Europeans, of course, brought all their European customs and recipes and so forth. And they also adopted things from the Native Americans. And so before you know it, you had some American dishes of food that you didn't have before, that Europeans grew very fond of. And Native Americans were also knowing some of the food stuff and so forth that was being prepared by the now European Americans. Okay. Moving on.
Van Dyke.
Okay, this is Anna Verkerk Van Dyke, number 7.
And that's
She-
actually the Van Dyke house right there.
Right, and she was married to Jan Van Dyke. These were the first Van Dykes in the area, and this became one of the biggest names in South Brunswick because the Van Dykes spread out in the South Brunswick area. So if you go along Davidson's Mill Road, okay, this is where this Van Dyke farm is. If you go along where Mapleton is, on the other side near the Delaware River, that's where Matthias Van Dyke stone house. It's now, I think, technically in Plainsboro, but at the time it was in South Brunswick. So you had the Van Dykes on both sides of the South Brunswick area when it was called the South Ward. In other words, part of New Brunswick. Okay. Next one is Jacomenti Gulick de Hart. Jacomenti is a Dutch female name. She was married to Cornelius de Hart. And again, another responsibility, just like it was with the Native Americans, the women were responsible for making the clothing. And so to do that, they had to spin the yarn, card the wool, do all that stuff. They obviously had tools and so forth to do that. But you notice they have the big hearth in the background there, and the cooking pot is going there. And she would also be throwing logs on the fire and that sort of thing. A lot of responsibility. You see the musket over by the window? The woman would be trained to shoot the musket too, because a lot of times the men were away, either far in the farm fields or hunting and so forth, and she would have to defend the property. So the responsibility and raising the children. So you see a lot in this picture, and a lot of responsibility on the woman's shoulders. Okay,
That's LaRue de Hart.
next we have Catherine LaRue de Hart. Now LaRue has been misspelled a lot because it sort of has a French origin. But the Lake family, that's a little bit later along Route 27, actually comes from LaRue. So remember, back in these days, the spellings were so corrupt of the names and so forth, and a lot of people couldn't read or write, and they signed their will or whatever with an X, and they had witnesses for it. That's one of the reasons for witnesses. And so the spelling was horrendous. So if you can imagine, you take LaRue and you could take from that and have the last name Lake, they're related. But today in this age, we probably wouldn't know that. You know, we wouldn't guess at it. Okay, DeHart, Catherine was married to Elias DeHart. So the DeHarts were a big family in the early settlers, okay? And this is, I think this is supposed to show a silhouette of a spice garden, wheat garden, and the woman of the house was responsible for that. And this was a planting of spices and so forth used for the cooking. And she would have to be skilled in nurturing these plants, planting them and so forth like that, and then harvesting them and preserving them, that sort of thing. Now, this was an important deal because you got to keep in mind that a lot of the food without proper refrigeration had to last a long time. So you could smoke it, you could salt it, you could spice it to make it palatable to eat, because some of that stuff we wouldn't be able to digest today. We're not equipped to do it. But the women knew what to do, and they knew how to make food last a long time. And also in the houses that they built, they had the root cellar. And that was below the first level of the house. And the reason for that, it was cooler. Okay, and women would have to prepare the containers, the baskets and so forth to preserve that food that was put down there. And luckily have a few cats around and dogs that chase rats and mice to keep that away. A lot of responsibilities till the refrigerator came along and solved a lot of problems. Okay.
This may not be part of the actual history you're talking, but how did they come up with the term root cellar? And wouldn't it just be food cellar or something like that?
They put root vegetables in there.
Well,
Yeah.
you're at the level of the roots of the trees and stuff. So that the root cellar is underneath the house.
Mm.
Okay, so you're
Okay.
deep down in the ground. You're probably digging 3 to 4 feet deep.
I think also though they put root vegetables. That's what they store.
Oh, yeah.
Carrots and potatoes.
Yeah, because they
Yeah.
lasted.
Yeah, and so yeah, the main thing is this was the refrigerator of the old days. Now, when the creeks and the rivers freezed over, they could get chunks of ice. That was a man's job, to drag the chunks of ice back to the house, and they could actually put ice in the cellar or ice in a pit outside and put straw over the ice, and the ice would last for quite a while. And that would get you through the roughest season for men and women would be the early spring, because your food stuff is you don't have as much as you had before. You're running out of things, and the planting is done, and before those crops are ready, you got to get through that time period. So any way you can preserve it is a very important role. That's a good question, though. Okay, now I'm down to number 10.
Well, the next one I have isn't labeled. It's a group of enslaved women working.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, now, I would be remiss if we were doing women in history and I didn't mention the slaves that the English and the Dutch brought with them. The Dutch were very keen on slave labor. The English were picking it up and seeing that the slave labor was very important for getting the fields ready, preparing, for, like I said, clearing the area for planting and for the planting and for the harvesting. And slave labor, economically, the nuts and bolts is you have workers that you're not paying. Therefore, you're not spending money for the labor that you need in order to produce your crops. Now, the first crops at this time, they're not really commercial crops. These are subsistence crops just to get through the winter. Okay? But the Dutch brought their slaves from Long Island. And they had a tradition of slavery that went far back. And I'm going to read off the names of the slaves who were the first women slaves in the South Brunswick area. This has never been done before. Anne, Dinah, Catherine, Dorothy, Susanna, Margaret, Dine, Abigail, Rose, Rebecca, Gemini, Sue, and Chloe.
Was Dinah a Dean? We said Dinah. One of the names is
Well,
Dinah.
Dine is the short, cute form for Dinah.
Was that's her last name? Dean? Do you know?
No, this is first name.
What's her first name?
These are only
But she-
first names.
So you don't know?
No,
her
no,
last
no,
name?
no.
Okay.
The slaves at this time had no last names. Some of the slaves later on, let's say after 1750, up until the time that slavery was abolished in New Jersey, there were some slaves who did have last names. You could say usually they took their master's last name. But there are some occasions we have some like Higby and so forth. The last names don't match up with the master's name. You have to keep in mind that some slaves were given to somebody else through a will that might have a different last name, were sold to somebody who had a different last name. So they may not go through their lifetime with the same master. And therefore, they might pick up another last name than the name of the family that they started with. Okay? But that gives you, that's what I call my top 10.
And sounds like based on those names, that they were probably given those names.
Yes, they were given the
Their
names
first
by the
names,
masters. Yeah, because they had to officially record those names. The only agency was the British government that was making sure, and it was not done very well, that the slaves were treated properly. The only other way that slaves were treated properly would be through the churches, through the ministers, and the ministers preaching and this and that. A lot of the slaves were baptized. And when the slaves married, a lot of the slaves were married in the church. That would be the Dutch Reformed Church or the Presbyterian Church in this area. And I'm researching that now because I'm up to 1825 and the slavery is still going on. Okay. So if you talk about slavery in the South Brunswick area, and a lot of people are hesitant to talk about it. First of all, they don't know much about it. And I've had people come up to me, and they ask me what I'm working on. I tell them, and they say, "Oh, we had slaves in this area. I didn't know that." That type of thing. Complete ignorance, which is not a good thing. That's why we're here.
And those 10 names you read, who were they?
That I'm not going to tell you.
Okay.
Because you can put two and two together, and the first 9 that I mentioned to you, those would be the owners of the slaves, because they're the first people in South Brunswick. And I only picked out the slaves who were here from 1700 to 1720. Okay. When we get up to about the year 1800, you're talking about a couple of hundred slaves. And the largest slave owners were the Lawrence family from Philadelphia, and that was the Long Ridge Farm on Ridge Road. they estimate they had 40 slaves, which is quite a sizable number.
Thank you for including them. It's important.
I think it's very, important. And I always will. You know, I've done this 3 times now where I mention the names of the slaves. And I think it needs to be done. I mean, you know, if you're going to deal with the history of an area, you can't say, it would be like if you talked about the conquistador and they come over and they beat heads on the Incas and all that. And all you do is concentrate on the soldiers that came over and fired their weapons at the Native Americans. And you don't mention anything about the Native Americans. What are you doing? You're a hypocrite. So you got to mention. Got to be done. Okay, so I'm finished.
Okay, so now we're gonna switch gears and go into the modern era with the latter day women here. So this is Winifred Cook. She was a reporter. She wrote articles for the Home News, the South Brunswick Post, I think the Trenton Times too. But she lived here right in Dayton back in the 60s. So actually, I know her. I'm in touch with her daughter. Her daughter lives out in California, and she sends me a lot of times like memorabilia and ephemera from South Brunswick. But that's how I got to know about this person. So that's Winifred Cook. And then the next one we have here is Stella. Stella Andrassi. Now she was a countess, and actually there's a program on PBS about her. I looked it up. I heard they were doing it, but there's a multi-part series, not a series, but there's a couple episodes on Stella Andrassi because she was in Europe during the war, and she was fleeing the war, and her and her husband. They had some means, and you know they were a little bit wealthy, and they helped at the war effort, you know, against the Germans, against the Nazis. So she was actually lived right here in South Brunswick, and when she was here, she had some inventions, and one of them is a solar cooker. That's a picture there. That way, people in the third world could cook without charcoal, and they could cook something, you know, without using a lot of smoke like they had to do. Charcoal is how I think a lot of the third world cooks things. But they have to burn down the trees first, and it's very intensive and it's dirty. So that was one of her inventions there, and it's actually a picture from the South Brunswick Post, I think from the 70s when she was in Kingston. And what do you know? You know anything about Estella?
Well, I think the key, other than the invention thing and so forth, is, you know, when we say South Brunswick Township, we don't think of royalty. You know, it just doesn't cross our mind. But the Andrassis represent European royalty. You know, on my list of settlers here, these were poor farmers who came across, like from New England, the English basically coming from there, Piscataway. They might stop there and then come to the South Brunswick area. But the Andrassis are royalty, and they come here and they live in our area. So that gives us a claim to fame.
Yeah, and like I said, I was very surprised. If you Google her name and look up PBS, you can see their specials that were done. I was actually surprised. Somebody from PBS actually called me a few years ago. I think it was during the pandemic, and they said, you know, we want to find any information you have on her. And I said, well, I don't have a lot as far as pictures. So I sent them what I had, but they were supposed to get back to me. They never did. But then I looked it up and I saw that there is an actual special on it. But you have to have PBS Prime or something like that. It's called Passport to look at it. Because I thought, oh, I'm going to look at it, but you have to have a higher level of PBS. But it's out there, and I think it was put out 2 years ago. So if you want to find out more, it's available, I guess, if you want to join PBS Prime.
Passport.
Yeah.
And Randy, I think it's interesting. She's originally from Sweden.
Mm-hmm.
When she marries, she goes to Hungary. And then, of course, World War II and so forth. So the count is a Hungarian count. That's where the nobility comes from. And so Swedes and Hungarians in the South Brunswick area are very small minorities. And that's another interesting thing, too.
Hungarians are more New Brunswick, right?
Yeah, the Hungarians in New Brunswick, that's sort of synonymous.
Okay, the next person we have here is a colorful character, Edith King. Now, she actually worked in New York City as a stage actress, but she found Kendall Park in South Brunswick to be a good place to live because it was in striking distance of the city, especially back in those days in the 60s. So she had actually worked with Lucille Ball on a Broadway play in the early 60s. So she had a gift shop here too, and I guess she ran it out of her house. But she ran a gift shop out of her house, and she was a television personality. I don't know how well she's done, but she was in those Sergeant Bilko, I guess, in the 50s, which was pretty big, you know, and there's other names on there. So she kind of made it to the big time. I found that interesting picture over there. But the other thing about her is that
That's not her husband.
we were looking through, Ed was looking through some of the first deeds for Kendall Park, and she had the first property. She had the first property that was in Kendall Park, right? She had the first house.
She bought the first lot.
The first lot. So then she, you know, she eventually moved to Florida in the early 70s, but there's Edith King.
Do you know where in Kendall Park she?
Not
Well,
exactly, no.
yeah, the earliest one, you know where Jolene is off of Kendall?
Mhm.
What I've read
Oh, right, 'cause you
is
should look-
that the houses in that area were like the first houses. So down where the school is and where Jolene starts, I think that's where the
Oh,
first
yeah.
houses were built. I could be wrong, but I think
You
that's.
know, I
that's
think
it.
I saw in the newspaper it said Jolene was a gift shop because I saw an ad for it.
Oh, yeah,
And
Jolene?
Yeah,
Yeah, that
I
makes
think, I
sense.
think that makes sense. Yeah.
Jolene is now a historical road, because that's where, Steely Dan.
Oh, yeah, right.
The rock group.
Yeah, Don Fagan.
Yeah, Fagan lived on there, and the Breedles, the Breedfeld
That's getting real.
family lived there too.
That's getting
So
real.
music wise and entertainment wise, Jolene's the place to go.
Yeah, right. Okay, I have a slide that's out of place here, and the next person is Gilda Gildenberg. I have some pictures of her. That's her on the left. She was awarding a pin. I think it was a Girl Scouts event, but she still lives. Oh, she just moved out of Kendall Park. The reason I know so much about her too, I actually got all this stuff from the newspaper, but then her son Doug Gildenberg works here in the library. So that's another funny thing. When he first started, I was like, "Hey, look at these pictures your mom had from the '60s." So yeah, she's been here for a long time. She was a teacher. She worked. She went to well, they called it Trenton State back then. But she always kept busy, and I think she's still pretty busy even in retirement. She moved into a retirement place. I can't remember the place of now, but she was saying that it was a big deal for female teachers to wear pantsuits back then, you know, because yeah, everyone wore a dress, and she's wearing a dress here, but I guess in the '70s, like, you know, things changed a little bit. So yeah, that's Gilda, and she's got a lot of energy. I can tell you that if you
Yeah.
know Gilda.
Yeah, we call people like that Dr. Peppers. They're all bubbly and they're active and they got ideas and so forth like that. So fantastic woman, and we have several in South Brunswick.
But yeah, there's Gilda. And the next one we have is Vivian Stringer. She still does live in town. I don't, she doesn't take an active part in town. I think she lives here because, you know, she was the women's basketball coach at Rutgers, and it was, you know, a convenient place to be. But I happened to look around one time and I saw that her name was on a property deal. I'm like, oh my God, she lives right here. So I just looked up a few things about her. She wrote a book about her time, you know, as a coach. And she's retired now, but yeah, we have it here in the library. But yeah, so Vivian Stringer.
And she's nationally known.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I just saw her, they said something about her last night at the
Yeah,
West Virginia and
Really?
Idaho game.
Oh,
Didn't they?
okay.
They
I
showed
don't
all
didn't
those
hear her name
women?
being called
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
I didn't hear
Yeah,
that.
but that's
for many
another
years.
thing to keep in mind, that some women in South Brunswick are nationally known. I would guess maybe internationally known, like Andrassy would be internationally known because of her work. But you take somebody like George Siegel, now he's internationally known. Well, there are some women in South Brunswick too that also can lay claim to that.
So next we have Joan Luckhart, and Joan was instrumental in saving the Slack Carroll house, and there was a whole story about how she saved it But she was one of the people that was in the grassroots organizations for the Dayton's Village Coalition to try to bring it downtown, preserve Dayton. So she was really instrumental with that. And yeah, she was part of the Historic Preservation Commission.
Now,
Right.
George Siegel should have made a statue of her and they put it in front of us like Carol.
Stopping a bulldozer.
Right. There you
Right.
go. That'd be dramatic.
That's what they should have done.
Oh, the Odai. Okay, thanks. Here, I'll fix that. Okay, the next person we have is Azubeg. She's done a lot of things in the town as far as charities, and you can read about them here. But she's been, I guess, actively involved in town for probably like I'd say about at least 10 years, right? Ed, do you have any idea about that?
I would say more than 10 years.
Yeah,
I think so too.
yeah. But I just thought her quote was good. Sometimes I can get quotes. I was able to get a quote, but her quote about to be knowledgeable of the cultural needs of the population one serves, it's essential to do that. I just thought it was a good quote. I pulled it out from a newspaper. Because a lot of times with these things, I have to look for it. Like, where do we get these from? I have to go through old newspapers. And it's kind of interesting because I look through the old digitized South Brunswick Post and find articles. And then that's how I come up with these little biographies. And next we have Deborah Johnson was the first directly elected mayor of South Brunswick, and she's the first. She's the first. Ted Cherry's the first black mayor, but he wasn't directly because the way they voted back then, because the Faulkner Act and everything. She was the first directly elected black mayor of South Brunswick, and she went on to do other things. She started the Women's Commission. And I think she's still around town. I mean, I used to see her in the library before the pandemic. She used to stop in and do things. But yeah, I mean, she remained involved in town even after she wasn't the mayor. And then the next person we have is Doris Karan. She was she was a school teacher, but she's also a historian because a lot of the things we have in our collection over here talk about the history of South Brunswick are from her scrapbooks that she had given to Seal Leadham, who was the town historian before Ed. So she has a lot to do with the collections and the knowledge that we have here on our town because she went through and she scrapbooked things, she saved articles. So Doris was instrumental with that.
And she's a legendary tough teacher.
Yeah, I heard, yeah.
Firm but fair.
But the kids liked her. I read the paper.
Yeah,
The kids
well,
liked her.
that's the thing. She wouldn't tolerate any nonsense. And of course, some kids like that because then they wouldn't be bullied.
Oh, yeah.
But she would not take any guff from anybody. And she was a tough cookie. Don't let the last name fool you. That's a Celtic Irish name, but she's a German.
Oh.
And she married an Irish person who was related to my wife's family. So we know about Doris, and we quake in our boots every time her name is mentioned.
So did she teach only in the South Brunswick school system, or did she?
I
teach
think
out-
she taught just in the South Brunswick
Yeah, I think so.
thing.
From what I saw.
And I think it would be just Dayton where she taught,
in the dates.
Yeah, I think so.
because she lived down there.
Yeah, I saw that
Yeah.
she taught before school.
Yeah. Oh, look, she was she helped create the original historical society back in the 70s, and that would be with Baker and people like that. So yeah, so she was back then. Well, that's 50 some years ago. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
and the nature thing is big too. She used to take the kids on field trips and so forth. Before they have all the rules and regulations now and insurance and, oh, we can't go there, we can't do this. She was, we're gonna do this and let's go. That's the type of teacher she was.
And the next person we have is Genevieve Kumaple. And I found information about her. She was at one time part of the Women's Commission. I think she was the president or what the officer was, but she was involved with that. But she also started My Goal Autism. Did you want to say something about it? Oh, I thought somebody said something. Yeah, so I looked into her background, and she started that website, and it's to help people and families with children that have autism. And yeah, she's involved. She's at Robert Wood, or I can't think of it right now off the top of my head, but yeah, she was part of St. Peter's too. So she's another one that I found out about just from looking around. I think somebody suggested it too, because if anybody has suggestions, that's the other thing I wanted to tell people. If you have somebody you'd like to see included, just email me and some information, and we'll review it and look through it. So it's just to be inclusive with these things as much as we possibly can. So if people have things, they can certainly bring them, email me, and we'll look into it. Yeah, just like you did. Okay, and the next person is Ellen Gambatese. Now she was the mayor's wife, but she took it. She was on the library board too, but she was very active here, and she loved the library. And actually, the room in the front of the library that looks like a turret, or that's named after her. It's an Ellen Gambatese room. It was named in her honor. Yeah, but she did a lot of work here with the library, and her husband was also history minded, and he helped a lot with the history projects. He was very like on board with those type of things. So that was the mayor's wife, and this was the first female mayor, Carolyn McCollum. You remember her?
I do.
Yeah.
Lived on New Road.
Okay. I saw her just a couple years ago. She gave me a book from Dayton. It was some kind of a book from Dayton Presbyterian Church. So she's been in here like since COVID. So I saw her a few years ago. She doesn't live in the community anymore, but yeah, she used to give history talks over at the senior center too when she was still in the community.
I think one of the greatest photos we have, and I think it was in the newspaper, Carolyn was with a group of dignitaries, official people, I think from the state, the county. They were right in the heart of Pigeon Swamp, looking out at the
Oh, that's them.
mist. What?
That's her.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
that's her. And they're looking out, and they're surrounded by this wild wilderness.
Like the stage picture.
Yeah, and they have to determine what they're going to do with the property.
Okay, I have that picture.
Make a park, do this, a green space, whatever. But she's leading them. She's right there, right in the muck and the mire. And they were all dressed up. That was the odd thing about the.
Okay. And the next one is Grace Plater. And what I like about Grace Plater was you can read about what she did here, but she was she was a librarian, I believe at the prison, at Trenton State Prison. So she just had all these welcoming wagons when they first moved to Kendall Park. She was part of the welcome committee, and she just sounds like a great person. She won the Barry and Dick Memorial Award. But when I read about her, I just thought, like, what a great person she sounded like, Yeah.
Yeah, she's another Dr. Pepper, very active, very lively.
And the next one we have is Gloria Brabson. She died a few years ago. She lived well into her. Yeah, look at the bottom. She was 95 years old. She remembers. Like she was talking about the election. So she died a few years back, but she lived to be pretty old, and she was part of the first aid squad during the war. And I don't know how common that was. Maybe that was common back then, but I actually have some pictures, and I see her name included. So yeah, she was part of the first aid squad. She was a teacher for many years in Dean's. So her granddaughter or her daughter, I think, gave me some information about her. But we have an autobiography that she wrote about her time here in South Brunswick, and it's pretty interesting. So yeah, Gloria Brabson.
A lot of the women you selected were teachers.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. I guess that's the information I have.
Important.
Yeah. And now this is Joyce Greenberg Lott. And Ed, you probably know quite a bit about her. She did some readings, but it looks like she's into the
Well, she's known first as a poet.
Right. What did I say? Did I say something wrong? Yeah, but she was I see Anne Sexton, Sylvia Plath. So I mean, she was like the more of into the modern poets, right?
I don't know about well, it depends on what
you're
you
the
mean
poet.
by modern. She's a life experience poet, and a lot of her stuff is based on the experiential. I would recommend, I think she was in a group of women. Yeah, the Cool Women. Right, she was one of the organizers of that. And they produced anthologies of poetry by women. So I highly recommend you check her out if you haven't read her stuff. I don't know what school to put her in. I know she's not into the rhymey stuff and all that. So I guess in that sense, she's a modern poet.
Yeah, yeah.
But I don't know if I'd exactly call it free verse, but it's really good stuff.
Yeah. And then moving along, we have Catherine Clayton, another historian. So again, some of the records that we have here in the library are from, it's the Catherine Clayton collection. She saved things and saved memorabilia. So yeah, she has a lot to do with what we have here in the library. And people at the time, when things were going on, it doesn't seem important to have ephemera about something that might have happened in town because it's just on a piece of paper. But many years later, it becomes interesting because we don't have a record of that. So she has photographs and some ephemera in there. Ephemera meaning, okay, what is ephemera? Ephemera, it's just like things that are. What's the other word for ephemera, Ed? What's
Like the aura?
a non-egg?
The
A non-egg-headed word for
ephemera,
ephemera.
sort of the ghost-like.
No, not that one.
You need another word.
No, for ephemera, for like things that are like not permanent. You have pieces of paper over an advertisement or something like that. That's what they call ephemera. And those are some of the things that she
Like
said.
trivia?
No, you're talking about. Okay,
little things,
Scrapbook
little
stuff.
stuff.
Scrapbook stuff,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah,
There you
stuff
go.
of not great consequence, but
But interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
interesting to somebody.
So Randy, she
Well,
talks about the
graves that are mentioned, is that anything that you covered in the cemeteries?
As far as a Zoom conference?
Oh, the unmarked
unmarked
grave she
graves
refers to,
outside the
that
high
was my
school.
question too.
On Ridge Road.
Well,
Let me
that's
see, what,
sentence.
I didn't catch what this is about, but I.
Oh yeah, she's talking about by the high school on Ridge Road, and they weren't
They're
sure
gone.
where the graves
Oh,
were.
they're
Yeah, I
gone?
think they're
They're
gone.
gone.
We don't know where they are.
Yeah, somebody asked me about that a while back. You were talking about the new high school. And there were like the Clayton, the Johnson family, they had the farm there. So they had a family plot, cemetery plot. But with a lot of others in South Brunswick, the farmers over time might move the stones to use the land for whatever they needed it for. So where the stones are, it doesn't necessarily mean where the bodies are. That's one thing. Another thing is they might just throw the stones away, or throw them to the side, like over on George's Road behind the school there. There's supposed to be stones there, but it's back in like a swampy area and so forth, so you can't really find them. So we haven't done a good job of taking care of those family plots. But at one time there was a cemetery plot there, and there were stones there. If you go way back in time, the stones are unreadable. So to whoever found them and tossed them away, probably didn't think anything of them.
So the stones could have been moved away, but the bodies were still there?
Somewhere.
Yeah, we have a lot of bodies buried in South Brunswick that are unmarked. We don't know. You take the Dean Cemetery
Mm-hmm.
off of Major Road,
Yeah.
okay, where that lane is. You have to walk back to it. It's not right by the road. The Slave Cemetery for the Deans is behind where the stones are. The slave cemetery area is not marked. I believe there's nothing there that would indicate that people are buried there. So all that we know is the slaves are buried behind where the stones are. Okay, so there's bodies there, but nothing to mark and indicate. That's a problem. We have, 3 stones now in the Public Works, building. Waiting, I guess, to be put somewhere. But they've been removed from the site where they were found. And, some of them are in pieces, not whole stones. So, we're not in good shape in that respect.
But at least they're preserved. They're not gonna be destroyed, you know?
Yeah,
they're
at
out
least those are, we have some plans for them. I gotta put a plug in for the Probosco Cemetery. And, that's, where Dean's Road Hall Road is, going towards Wawa. You go just over the turnpike, and there's a rise there with a fence around it. That's the Probosco Family Cemetery. There's not one Probosco stone in there. There's only one stone in there. And that's a Colonel Kraus that I wrote about. And I have a book that has been published about his demise. He was found dead in the Road Hall Tavern on Cranberry South River Road. His is the only stone there. But those stones were moved from some area. And I think in the real old days, going back to the time here when these pioneers and so forth, they built or they set up cemeteries very close to the road. And then as time went by, they moved the stones away. There was there's a sort of a religious thing of you bury somebody close to a road. Okay. And so the bodies are there close to the road, but the stones are away from where the bodies are.
Okay. And the next person we have is Ann Zeman. Now, Ann, she's actually an author, but she's also been working with she works with the commission, right? She works with you, Terry.
Yeah, she's on HPC.
She's on HPC, she's on the Historic Preservation Commission.
Yeah.
She's been for years. And she's part of the Kingston Historical Society. So
The Mapleton Preserve as well.
okay, and so she's been involved in the community for a long time. Yeah, she's still out there doing all these things. I tried to update them, and I looked at hers, and I wanted to make sure she was still doing all these things. So what you see up there is accurate. Yeah. And then next we have this is Seal Leadham. Seal used to be, she was the town historian before Ed. She was working in the library for many years. This is the Seal Leadham archive. This room was dedicated to her. When she was still working here, and it was nice to be able to do that for her when she was still here doing the work, And she's very modest. Like she didn't she didn't like the attention, but we wanted to make sure that she knew that she was appreciated, and she did tons of work. A lot of the things the pictures, the things I share on social media, the things I write about are the things that she's gathered and organized and did the research on. So she was very instrumental in that regard. So Seal was she's a great historian, and so we miss her. And the next person I have here is Shirley Ozapat. Now she was active in the community more in the past. I see her from time to time over the senior center. She's doing fine. She's doing well, but she got involved with getting the kids to work, the high school kids to interact with the seniors, and she was big with that. And she helped Seal too. As a matter of fact, Seal and Shirley were friends, so they worked together with things. And the next one I have is a new one, and this is Patricia Birchnall. Her daughter Donna just gave me this information this past week, and I think I have everything in there, right? But she was a nurse over at the constable school, and they actually have a scholarship that was put in her name. I don't know if it's still active, but for many years they had a scholarship. She was very dedicated to her job. And she stayed with the job, and she liked it so much that she stayed there. She knew that she wasn't doing well.
I wonder why I can't find the pieces that go here.
What's that? Did somebody say something?
Yeah.
Somebody online.
Okay. Do you have a question? It might have been just they didn't have their mic off. So this is this is an example. If somebody wants to include somebody, they could just email me, and we'll look into see what we can find about it. But this is our newest addition to the Women of South Brunswick. Thanks to Donna.
It's our mother.
Yeah.
Oh.
Oh yeah,
wow.
right.
That's very nice.
I went to constable when she was a nurse.
You really?
Yeah.
I worked with her.
I
in constable
remember.
school.
I still am on Starling. I still am on Starling Road.
You
Well, I
still on
live in the
Starling
house.
Road?
Yeah, I live in the house I grew up in.
And this is somebody I wanted to include, Christine Mariano. She's involved with a lot of things. How I know her is I didn't know all these things about her that are up here. Somebody actually forwarded me this information a couple years ago before the pandemic, and it's so many things happened. I kind of lost track of it. But for National Night Out, I think she volunteers and helps coordinate for the township. And it's really great because whenever I emailed her, sometimes you email people and they don't get back to you and you wonder, am I going to get this thing done? Will it get done in time? She would email me back usually within like a couple minutes. I was so happy that she was the person coordinating because like Ed and I, and sometimes when I couldn't go, Ed was there at National Night Out, and it's hot there. You want to make sure everybody's got what they need. And you have a space and everything. She was really great with coordinating all that. And you could read up there about her history here, what happened, and how she came through all these things. It's kind of a inspiring story there. I'm not going to read it, but I actually know this person, and I worked with her for National Night Out, and I didn't know that it was the same person until I looked it over just recently. I'm like, oh, that's the person I talked to on the phone. So now I know her story, and there it is up there. But that's it for as far as the people that we have for women's history. I don't
What
have
about
anything
Anna
else.
Quinlan?
What's that? And Quinlan, we didn't include her because she was only here for high school, but I do have information on her. She's actually on our website. The reason I didn't include her for tonight is because, already it's like we're at hour 15. I'm so glad everybody came and stayed the whole time. That's really great. But yeah, there's other people who lived in town and don't anymore. And there's a few of those people. There's a couple of people who are I didn't include because they no longer live here. And Anna Quinlan was one of them.
Another one would be, or a star.
Or a star, yeah. I found out she just passed away a couple years ago. I didn't know that until just recently.
6 months ago.
Oh, okay, yeah, I saw it, and I spoke to her. She gave me information we had in the archives about her son, Oren, who was a kind of a famous musician. Because you're from the area. But yeah, I looked it up, and I couldn't believe that all the accolades he got when people were memorializing him back in, I guess, like almost 10 years ago now. So yeah, I talked to her a few years ago.
She lived in Windrose.
Yeah, that's where I visited her. Yep, that's where I went over. And yep, so that's great. Yeah, there's a lot of people.
One of the great things is, as you mentioned other names, we have a wealth of people that we can draw on as far as women in history and so on. So when the month rolls around, there are many other women that we're going to feature in this thing. The problem is we have so many, and then we have to narrow it down because of the time constraint. But it's great to mention the other names, and then as Randy said, just notify him if you can think of anybody.
Yeah.
So we have it for our program next year.
Yeah, I'll try to keep that in mind because I did think of her when I found out. But yeah, that's our presentation for tonight. I don't know if anybody has any questions, they can ask us now or email me. Yeah, so.
Well,
Thank you.
this is open to any questions now, from
Another thing about Carolyn McCallum, when I first moved to Kendall Park, there were a lot of migrant families living here. So in the summer, we would pick up the children of the migrant families, and I rode with her, and we brought them, they had summer school for the children of the migrant families.
Oh,
And we
that's
did
nice.
that for several
So
summers.
for people that
But
were
I don't
working
think
here?
we had
Yeah,
it
these
staffed.
Like our
are the
farmers?
farm workers,
Farm
right?
workers?
The farm
Yeah,
workers.
Yeah.
From down in
farmers
Kingston?
workers.
Migrant workers down in Kingston
No,
at the
I was
nurseries?
in Dayton or Dean.
Oh,
yeah, it was
I
where
don't
the
remember.
farmland
Yeah.
would be,
Long time
Down the-
ago.
potato farms,
Princeton
whatever.
Nursery.
That's what, see, South Brunswick, remember I told you, you have the Piedmont area and you have the intercoastal plain. Well, where the farmland is the intercoastal plain. So that takes care of Dayton, some of Monmouth Junction, so all of east South Brunswick is that farmland that we're talking about. That's where a lot of the
I had the
migrants
farm
work.
families.
Yeah,
In the summertime to help with the crops. And we had
right, right.
little children,
Okay.
and we brought them to school.
Right, and the
Okay.
migrant workers would go where the crops needed to be harvested, hence the name migrant, so they moved from this to this to this. And it moved the kids along. We had that problem, I taught in New Brunswick. And we had some migrant families there, and you wouldn't think so with the city and all that. And we'd see them 1 month, 2 months, and then they'd be gone. But they had to register, by law, they had to be getting some sort of education. That was a big challenge.
Well, there's one thing I wanted to mention too. The South Brunswick Commission, Women's Commission is looking for people. They're gonna update their website. And they're looking for volunteers and looking for officers and everything. I might put out something to you all in a list too, because I wanted to mention that. But yeah, they're going through I guess a transition period where some people moved out of town. So they're looking for other people, and I'm gonna put that out to the email to everyone on the list too. I just wanted to mention it while we have it for you. But yeah.
And I'd like to mention my book, which you can check on Barnes and Noble.
We have it here too.
It has some very strong women in the book. And it's called 13 Stripes. And I use my full name for the author, which is embarrassing to me because I don't use it, but Edward Robert Belding. And so you look up on Barnes and Noble, you can check that out. It has a review of the book and it has a description of what
It's on
the
Amazon
narrative is
also.
about. It's on Amazon, it's all over. It's in, I heard it was being sold in Australia. It's over in Europe, so it's all over the place.
Are you making any money?
No, of course not.
But you're a star.
No, I'm not even that. But,
We're all stars.
It's a mystery too, so but it has a lot of local history in it, so you'll enjoy it. And you'll say, oh, I
Anybody else
remember
for,
that, I remember the Road Hall Tavern.
Any more?
No, thank you.
All right. Well, good night, everybody
You're two
out
of the
there, and
6 children
we'll see you next month.
Yeah.
Bye bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Andy, you can take that home with you.
All right.
What's that?
You can take it home with you.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You want it, of course.
No, I'll take it for breakfast.
Or you can leave it here for tomorrow.
Yeah, that's true.
Thank you. See you
Yeah,
again.
thank you for
Yeah,
coming.
Got it,
you.
thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for including your mom. That was interesting. I
We
didn't
need
know
more
anything about
live
her.
people because the Zoom thing is awkward, you never
Yeah,
know
yeah.
what people are thinking.
Yeah.
They like to say, those were people who were listening, the verbiage we heard, but we couldn't tell what it was.
I think it's much better.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, before COVID, this place was packed. We had every chair taken. Then COVID hit, now we have to.
Yeah.
What'd you say?
Well, thanks for coming.
Thank you. I appreciate all the time.
Okay, great.
Oh,
Enjoy
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Thanks, Randy.
Thank
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Randy.
Have you